When I became a grandfather at 65, I thought I knew my role. I was supposed to be the wise one, the teacher, the keeper of family stories and life lessons. I had 7 decades of experience to share, after all. Career wisdom, life skills, moral guidance. Surely that's what my grandchildren needed from me. 6 years later, I can honestly say I got it backwards. While I was busy trying to teach them about life, they were quietly teaching me about living. My name is George, and I'm 71 years old. I spent 38 years working in banking, where I thought I understood people and how the world works. I raised 2 children who turned out to be good adults, maintained a solid marriage, and considered myself reasonably knowledgeable about navigating life's challenges. But my 3 grandchildren, Emma, who's now 14, Sam, who's 11, and little Lucy, who just turned 8, have been my most profound teachers. Not in the ways you might expect, though. They haven't taught me how to use smartphones or explained social media to me, though they've tried. Instead, they've shown me completely different ways of thinking, feeling, and experiencing the world that I'd somehow forgotten or never learned in the first place. Today, I want to share 5 things my grandchildren have taught me that have genuinely changed how I approach my own life. These aren't cute anecdotes about kids saying funny things. These are real insights that have shifted my perspective on everything from decision-making to happiness, to what it means to age well. If you're a grandparent, or if you spend time around younger people, you might recognize some of these lessons. And if you don't have grandchildren yet, maybe this will help you see the young people in your life as potential teachers rather than just recipients of your wisdom. The first lesson: curiosity trumps certainty. The first thing that struck me about my grandchildren was their relationship with knowledge. In my generation, we were taught to value certainty. You learned facts, you formed opinions, and you stuck with them. Changing your mind was seen as weakness or inconsistency. My 11-year-old grandson, Sam, approaches the world completely differently. Last summer, we were working in my garden when he asked me why tomatoes are red. I gave him what I thought was a reasonable explanation about chlorophyll breaking down and other pigments showing through as the fruit ripens. Instead of accepting my answer, Sam said, "But why did plants decide to make them that color? Did they choose it, or did something else choose for them?" Then he wanted to know if tomatoes in other countries were different colors, if animals see red the same way we do, and whether the first tomatoes were red or if they became red over time. What amazed me wasn't just his curiosity, but his comfort with not knowing. He didn't need immediate answers to all his questions. He was genuinely excited by the mystery of not understanding something completely. I realized I'd lost that somewhere along the way. As an adult, and especially as I got older, I'd become uncomfortable with uncertainty. I wanted clear answers, definitive solutions. But Sam showed me that the questions can be more interesting than the answers. Since then, I've started approaching things differently. When I read the news and feel confused or overwhelmed by complex issues, instead of forcing myself to have firm opinions immediately, I sit with the questions. When my doctor explains a health concern, I ask follow-up questions instead of pretending I understand everything. This shift has made me more comfortable with the uncertainties that come with aging. Instead of being frustrated that I can't predict or control everything about my health, my finances, or my future, I've learned to be curious about how things will unfold. The second lesson: emotions are information, not problems to solve. My generation was taught to manage emotions, control them, keep them in check. Especially as men, we learned that strong feelings were something to overcome rather than experience. When my children were young, I often responded to their emotional outbursts with solutions rather than understanding. My 8-year-old granddaughter, Lucy, has taught me a completely different approach. When she's upset, she doesn't try to hide it or fix it immediately. She feels it fully, talks about it, and then moves on naturally. Last month, Lucy was devastated because her best friend chose to sit with someone else at lunch. She came to my house in tears, and my instinct was to explain that friendships have ups and downs, that she shouldn't take it personally, that she should find other children to sit with. But something made me pause. Instead, I asked her to tell me more about how she felt. For 20 minutes, Lucy described her sadness, her confusion, her worry that she'd done something wrong. She didn't want solutions. She wanted someone to understand her experience. By the end of our conversation, she was feeling better. Not because I'd fixed anything, but because she'd been heard and had fully processed her feelings. The next day, she and her friend were playing together again as if nothing had happened. Watching Lucy taught me that emotions aren't problems to solve. They're information to understand. When I feel frustrated about physical changes in my body, instead of immediately trying to fix or ignore those feelings, I ask myself what they're telling me. When I feel lonely or sad about friends who have passed away, I don't rush to distract myself. I sit with those feelings and learn from them. This has been revolutionary for me as an older adult. Instead of viewing difficult emotions as signs that something's wrong with me, I now see them as natural responses to natural changes. It's made the emotional challenges of aging much more manageable. The third lesson. Present moments are more real than future plans. I spent most of my working life focused on the future, 5-year plans, retirement savings, long-term goals. This served me well professionally and financially, but it also trained me to always be mentally living somewhere other than where I was. My 14-year-old granddaughter, Emma, has a completely different relationship with time. She plans for things she's excited about, but she doesn't let future concerns dominate her present experience. Last fall, Emma was preparing for high school tryouts for the soccer team. I expected her to be anxious, constantly practicing, worrying about the outcome. Instead, I found her genuinely enjoying the preparation process. She practiced because she loved playing, not because she was anxious about making the team. When I asked her if she was nervous about the tryouts, she said something that stopped me in my tracks. I can't know if I'll make the team until I try out, so why would I worry about it now? Right now, I'm just enjoying getting better at soccer. Her approach seemed so foreign to me. Throughout my life, I would have spent weeks before those tryouts, running through every possible scenario, planning for various outcomes, working myself into a state of anxiety about things I couldn't control. Emma's perspective made me realize how much mental energy I'd wasted over the years worrying about futures that either never materialized or unfolded in ways I couldn't have predicted anyway. Now, when I catch myself spinning worry stories about my health, my finances, or my family's future, I try to follow Emma's example. I ask myself, what can I actually do about this right now? If there's action I can take, I take it. If there isn't, I try to redirect my attention to what's actually happening in my current moment. This doesn't mean I don't plan for the future anymore, but I've learned to hold those plans lightly, understanding that life has its own timeline that doesn't always match mine. The fourth lesson. Mistakes are experiments, not failures. Throughout my career, and much of my adult life, I tried to avoid making mistakes. Errors were embarrassing, costly, signs that I hadn't prepared well enough or wasn't competent enough. This perfectionist approach served me in some ways, but also made me risk-averse and overly cautious. My grandchildren have a completely different relationship with making mistakes. They expect them, learn from them, and move on without the shame and self-criticism that I attached to errors. Sam demonstrated this beautifully when he was learning to ride his bike without training wheels. I watched him fall dozens of times, each time getting up, adjusting something about his approach, and trying again. There was no drama, no self-recrimination, no fear of looking foolish. Each fall was just information about what didn't work, bringing him closer to figuring out what would. When I offered suggestions or worried about him getting hurt, he'd say things like, "It's okay, Grandpa. I'm learning what not to do." His casualness about the whole process was remarkable to me. This got me thinking about all the things I've avoided trying in my later years because I was afraid of not being good at them immediately. I've wanted to learn watercolor painting for years, but convinced myself I was too old to start, that I'd be embarrassed by my early attempts. Inspired by Sam's approach, I signed up for a beginner's art class at the community center. And yes, my first paintings were terrible. But instead of feeling ashamed, I found myself genuinely curious about what I'd do differently next time. Each bad painting became useful information rather than evidence of my inadequacy. This shift has opened up possibilities I'd closed off to myself. I'm now more willing to try new things, knowing that initial incompetence is just part of the learning process, not a judgment on my worth or intelligence. The fifth lesson. Joy is a choice, not a result. Perhaps the most profound lesson my grandchildren have taught me is about the nature of happiness and joy. I grew up believing that joy was something that happened to you when conditions were right, when you achieved goals, when things went well, when you had reasons to be happy. All three of my grandchildren seem to understand instinctively that joy is something you choose moment by moment, regardless of circumstances. Lucy demonstrated this most clearly during a family camping trip last summer. It rained for 3 of our 4 days, ruining most of our planned activities. The adults were frustrated, rearranging schedules, complaining about the weather. Lucy, meanwhile, spent those rainy days discovering how raindrops raced down the tent windows, making up songs about the sounds rain makes on different surfaces, and creating elaborate imaginary worlds with her stuffed animals. She didn't need the weather to cooperate, to have a wonderful time. She found wonder and entertainment in what was actually happening, rather than being disappointed by what wasn't. Watching her taught me something crucial about aging well. I'd been waiting for my circumstances to be perfect before allowing myself to be fully happy. When my health improves, when my finances are more secure, when I'm not worried about this or that, then I'll really enjoy life. Lucy showed me that joy isn't a reward for having everything sorted out. It's a way of engaging with whatever is actually happening. Since learning this from her, I've started looking for small delights in ordinary moments. The taste of my morning coffee, the feeling of sunlight through my living room window, the satisfaction of completing a crossword puzzle. This doesn't mean I ignore real problems or pretend everything is wonderful when it isn't. But I've learned to separate my current circumstances from my capacity to experience moments of joy within those circumstances. Bringing the lessons together. These 5 lessons from my grandchildren have fundamentally changed how I approach being 71 years old. Emma, Sam, and Lucy didn't set out to teach me anything. They were just being themselves, living naturally, approaching the world with fresh eyes. But their perspectives have shown me how many assumptions I'd made about aging, about learning, about what was possible for someone my age. I'd unconsciously accepted that getting older meant becoming more rigid, more fearful, more closed off to new experiences. My grandchildren have shown me that growth doesn't stop at any particular age, that curiosity is more valuable than certainty, that emotions are friends, not enemies, that the present moment is the only time that's actually real, that mistakes are doorways, not dead ends, and that joy is always available if we're willing to choose it. I'm not suggesting that aging doesn't come with real challenges and losses. I have health concerns my grandchildren don't face, financial worries they don't understand, and grief over losses they haven't experienced yet. But their approaches to living have given me tools for navigating these challenges with more grace and less fear. The most surprising discovery has been that in trying to be a good grandfather, I became a better student. I thought my role was to pass down wisdom, but I've learned just as much as I've shared. This intergenerational learning goes both ways, of course. My grandchildren benefit from my experience and perspective, just as I benefit from their fresh approaches to life. But I've learned not to assume that wisdom only flows in one direction. If you spend time around younger people, whether they're your grandchildren, neighborhood kids, or young adults in your community, I encourage you to notice what they might be teaching you, often without meaning to. What approaches to life do they take that you've forgotten or never learned? What assumptions about aging and capability are you making that might not actually be true? What possibilities have you closed off to yourself that might still be available? My grandchildren have taught me that learning doesn't have an expiration date, that growth can happen at any age, and that sometimes the best teachers are the ones who don't even realize they're teaching. Emma, Sam, and Lucy continue to surprise me with their wisdom. Just last week, Lucy asked me if I was excited about getting older. When I gave her a complicated answer about the challenges and benefits of aging, she thought about it and said, "It sounds like every age has good parts and hard parts. Maybe the trick is paying attention to the good parts while you're living them. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. Or in this case, out of the mouth of an 8-year-old philosopher who's still teaching her grandfather how to live. What have the young people in your life taught you lately? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing these insights helps us all remember that learning is a lifelong adventure, and our best teachers often come in the smallest packages. Thank you for listening to an old grandfather who's still figuring things out, often with the help of his very wise grandchildren.